651. The world was silent. As the fog embraced the two figures standing on the surface of the water, a smile soon graced Lazarus's features as he looked at the red-eyed figure before him. Is this your intent? Not bad. It almost felt like a certain someone he once knew. One that was related to blood. But at the same time, it felt different. Lazarus had merely caught a glimpse of it. He didn't know exactly what Anah's intent was. Yeah. Looking at his body, Anas raised his head back up to look at the merchant with a complicated expression. His mind felt a lot fresher at this very moment. He couldn't quite explain it, but it was almost as though a mental block that had been weighing him down for a long time had finally been lifted, granting him the ability to form an intent. One that he had been trying to chase for the longest time. Progression doesn't only come from the body. A very important aspect is the mind. Lazarus began to explain as though he understood Anah's thoughts. You can be as talented as you want, but if your mind is not there, you will never be able to progress. This is especially so for things like intent. It's not something you develop just because you want it to. Well, unless you're some sort of freak, but most of the time, it comes when your mind reaches a certain state. Lazarus was talking through experience. This was what he had found during the times of the past. Progression didn't just come from the body. The sudden increase in mana, the stronger body, and so on. The mind was an extremely important aspect of progression. The higher one ranked, the more important this aspect was. This was also one of the main reasons why most of the people who reached the highest of ranks were people whose thoughts and emotions were indifferent, or cold. Because only such people had firm minds. I see. Taking in the merchant's words, Anas looked at his own hands. He didn't really know how to feel about the situation. A part of him still wanted to worship the goddess, but at the same time, he also understood that the goddess was what was tying him down. He had been so focused on trying to repay her kindness that he had neglected everything else. I still wish to become a Luminarch, but he no longer planned on prioritizing it over himself. His mind felt clearer when his thoughts paused there. Yeah, where do you think this fog comes from? Do you think this is something that comes naturally with this strait? Anah's words were cut, but Lazarus, as he looked around with narrowed eyes. His focus was now directed towards the strange fog that surrounded them. This caught Anas in an awkward moment, but he soon snapped out of it and looked around. He wasn't really sure himself. He wasn't all too familiar with the sinful strait. If there's someone you need to ask, then it should be Anne. The merchant stood above the water in silence before eventually nodding his head. Yes, you're right. The best course of action is to leave this place. They had stayed here for long enough. Something about this place felt creepy, and, looking around, Lazarus's face turned grim. No matter how much he tried to think about it, he just couldn't see how the fog could have caused one of the 7 lords and his crew to die like this. Something about the fog felt extremely unsettling. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but this was definitely no regular fog. It was plop, plop. Exclamation mark. A sudden bubbling sound echoed, and Anas and Lazarus's heads snapped in the direction of the bubbling sound. Anas' eyes grew a deeper shade of red as he looked towards the bubbling with deep apprehension, his entire body tensing. Lazarus was different. He wasn't planning on waiting to see what the bubbling was. Looking up and listening to Pebble whisper in his mind, Lazarus nudged Anas with his arm and bolted towards the entrance of the strait. Leave, now. His voice was firm, and Anas snapped out of it. He followed right behind Lazarus as the two quickly rushed forward. How does he know the way? He isn't even crashing against the sides of the cliffs. As they ran, Anas couldn't help but marvel at the merchant's skills. Unlike him, who had previously struggled to gain his bearings, the merchant moved in a way that made it seem like he was completely unaffected by the fog. We're almost there. Lazarus's eyes narrowed as he looked into the distance. He could hear the faint, muffled sound of the water crashing against the rock surface. He knew that they were close to reaching the exit. Just a little more. Just a little. Both Lazarus and Anas froze, their bodies locking in place. Boom, boom. The deafening sound of the water crashing violently against the jagged rocks echoed, reverberating through the air with an intensity that rattled their bones. It was so close. Closer than they realized. Yet, they couldn't move. It wasn't just hesitation. It was as if their very wills were shackled. Their muscles refused to obey. Their eyes were frozen, wide and shaky as they were transfixed by the enormous eye that had materialized from the depths of the fog. It was massive, its bloodshot iris seething with an unnatural glow that pierced through them, as though it could see into the very core of their souls. And in that moment, nothing else existed. No thoughts, no sounds, no escape, just the suffocating weight of that gaze. At the same time, not far from them. They're taking quite a while. I wonder what's taking them so long. Anne's brows were knit tightly as she looked towards the distance where the little assistant and the strange merchant had left. It had been almost 2 hours since they had left, and she had yet to hear any news of them. This was a little worrying, considering that all they had to do was check out the situation and come back. Maybe they've found something and are investigating. This was most likely what had happened. She wasn't too worried about their safety. Especially not when the merchant was present. He was strong, so strong that even she felt slightly apprehensive when staring at him. Although his physical body wasn't strong, his mind was. Not only that, but he also appeared to have several extremely powerful companions with him. He wasn't someone she could lightly provoke. And that was the reason she wasn't worried. If something really did happen to him, I'm sure he'll have enough time to use the flare. So long as he shot the flare that she had given him, then she'd start moving immediately and help the two out. However, the flare never really showed up. And soon, she saw the faint silhouettes of two figures appearing from a distance. It's them. Her eyes squinted to get a better look, and it was indeed them. The two looked relatively unharmed, with both of their expressions calm. Eventually, they arrived at the bottom of the ship as Anne greeted them. So, how did it go? There's nothing much. It's all clear. Anas answered her from below, his expression relaxed. Nothing. Anne was surprised to hear this. If there was nothing, then what took them so long? It's because there was nothing that it took us so long. Anas continued as though he could read her mind. We thought that the situation was strange, and so we dug around every nook and cranny of the place in hopes of finding something, but, he shrugged, nothing. There's absolutely nothing. Then what about from above? If there was nothing below then. Also, nothing. Lazarus was the one to reply this time. He was wearing a complicated expression while thinking about the strait. The moment they entered, they found nothing unusual. There were no ambushes, nothing. It was just a clear and unobstructed strait. Even with mana sense and everything, he felt nothing. This in itself felt extremely odd. However, after carefully searching through every nook and cranny of the place, there was no denying the fact that there was truly nothing. In that sense, we should be clear to go. Both Lazarus and the little assistant hopped onto the ship with a single jump. He then tossed the flare to Anne. Here, catching it, Anne looked at the two of them in confusion. Did they really not find anything? She had a hard time believing them. However, seeing nothing abnormal with their eyes or minds, she eventually gave the signal to her crew, and the ship started to sail forward. Boom, boom. The booming sound of the waves reached her ears shortly after as the ship neared the strait. Staring at it, Anne felt her heart grow heavy. However, she resisted and had the ship continue forward, eventually passing the entrance and entering the quiet strait. So far, nothing. It's just like the two of them said. The strait wasn't very long. At their current speed, they were moving, it would take about an hour for them to cross it in its entirety. The entire time, Anne felt nervous as the ship moved forward. She wasn't the only one, as her crew showed signs of nervousness as they navigated the narrow passage. The only ones who looked normal were Anas and the merchant, who looked ahead with calm looks. They had already explored the place, so they were confident that they wouldn't encounter anything. And indeed they didn't. An hour after entering, they soon spotted the end of the strait as the ship casually moved out of it. It's really that easy. Looking back at the strait with an incredulous expression, Anne touched her face several times to make sure that this was real. It's really as they said. There was nothing. No ambushes of the sort, not even strange monsters. This felt extremely odd to her, considering how this was the perfect place to ambush them. Could it be that the temple hasn't put out a bounty on us? I doubt it, Lazarus replied, his arms resting against the armrail of the ship. Looking towards the distance as his clothes and hair fluttered, he mumbled. Maybe they decided the risk wasn't worth the reward, or perhaps they simply didn't have enough time to set up an ambush. Either way, I doubt they won't come. Perhaps they were just scouting us for a better understanding of how to deal with us. Lazarus had all sorts of thoughts regarding the situation. He also didn't believe things were as easy as they seemed to be. He wholly believed that this was merely the prelude of what was yet to come. But, even as several days passed, their path was completely unobstructed. Not a single ship neared them the entire time. Could it be that the temple had really not set up a bounty? Otherwise, why was their journey so smooth? Chapter 652. The strangeness of nothing 2. Clank. Sparks flew in the air as a sword clashed against a rough, spiky surface. Skirting back, a gray-eyed figure panted heavily as he stared at the massive creature standing before him. Watch out! As a scream echoed from right behind him, as though he had eyes at the back of his head, Leon's body blurred and faded from the spot. Bang! Dust exploded into the air as the ground trembled beneath the impact. Cracks spider-webbed out from the point of contact, and shards of stone jutted up like broken teeth around the crater's rim. The ball itself, covered in jagged spikes the size of swords, hummed with a low, ominous sound. A silence fell over the field. Appearing not far, Leon looked at the massive armored creature and drew a cold breath. This really is no joke. The moment they entered the red zone, they immediately encountered several terror-ranked creatures. Leon had lost count of the number of terror-ranked creatures he had fought, with this one adding to the total number. Leon took a deep breath, his gaze scanning the surroundings. Dead trees cluttered the landscape around him, their twisted limbs casting long, brittle shadows. The ground beneath his feet was dry and cracked, parched by the heat coming from the pale white sun that blazed in a cloudless sky. Like an oven, the air seemed to shimmer under the intense heat. With the trees so densely packed, it was hard to move and see much into the distance. Thankfully, Leon wasn't supposed to duke it out by himself. He wasn't alone. Shoo, shoo, shoo. All of a sudden, emerging from deep within the forest were numerous swords as they shot into the air. They hovered in place, humming ominously as they slowly turned to point toward the armored monster, then, without warning, they burst into flames. Ruar! The monster roared at the sight of the swords, but before it could even react, the ground beneath it turned pitch black as several hands emerged from beneath, grasping onto its legs. A massive purple magic circle formed right above the monster as it sealed it in place. Ho! Leon looked at the sight above him with a wry smile. He could feel every hair on his body raise at the sight presented before him. I don't think I'll survive this one. To make matters worse, several other attacks started to form right above the monster, and Leon, who was standing not far from it, suddenly felt the pressure grow on him. Thankfully, the space behind him wiggled as a white-haired figure appeared and grasped his body, pulling him into the shadows. Leon's vision grew dark shortly after that. And then, bang! The world trembled. It was as if an earthquake had suddenly erupted. The ground split open with a thunderous crack, trees splintered and toppled, and thick clouds of dust billowed into the air. The monster wasn't even given enough time to let out a whimper before it was suddenly killed. By the time Leon emerged from the darkness, he felt at a complete loss. All he saw was a pile of flesh. He wasn't even sure there was anything left of it. Wow, that was easy. Aoife emerged from the distance, her silhouette framed by the settling dust. A small little girl walked next to her, a lollipop in hand, as she looked at her surroundings with disinterest. Swoosh! The scattered swords slowly rose from the ground and drifted toward Aoife, aligning themselves before sheathing smoothly across her back. The swords numbered in the hundreds, and yet, they all fit snugly in her sheath. It was a sight that made Leon's mind pause for a moment until he eventually shook his head. She's rich. This sort of artifact shouldn't be strange. He then looked towards the distance, where he saw Evelyn appear. Her face was a little pale, but she was otherwise doing fine. Her attack was the strongest out of all the ones that had been aimed at the monster. It was only natural for her to be tired. Several other cadets emerged from the woods shortly after, as they all looked at the monster with complex expressions. Normally, this would be enough for us to graduate, but I guess this year is different. Aoife scratched the back of her head while reaching out for Teresa's head. Smack. Ow, only for it to be smacked away by the little girl. What the hell is your problem? Aoife glared at the little girl who pouted. What am I supposed to do? There's no signal here. How am I supposed to let you watch Justice Man? You took what's mine. No, what? HMPH. This girl. Leon awkwardly scratched the side of his face while staring at the two before settling his gaze over to Kira as she looked towards the distance. Matching her line of sight, he saw several explosions in the distance. Looks like they're also fighting a terror-ranked monster. The expedition was divided into 2 teams. Each team went to different areas to hunt. Their base camp was located not far from where they were. The goal in their hunt was to find themselves some food and resources. The monsters not only provided with good meat, but they were also provided with great equipment. Their hide could be used for covers and roofs, while their bones could be used to create the structures of their makeshift houses. This was how things were supposed to go. But they miserably failed. Looking at what remained of the monster, Leon sighed. If it had a bone, I doubt it'll be intact. He felt his heart ache at the thought. However, in the end, he could only shake his head as he moved towards the monster and searched through whatever was left of it. As he did, the others began scouting their surroundings in search of any monster. Over the past several days, they had grown more and more adept at working together. Having been ambushed more times than they could count, and almost dying several times, this was to be expected. Unlike before, they now moved as one seamless team. It was a gratifying sight to see. Quote. A pair of black eyes stared at the group in the distance. She stood suspended in the air, her presence melding seamlessly with the world around her. Her black hair swayed softly, and her eyes blinked lazily before she pulled out a notepad and began jotting down a few thoughts. In general, Delilah was satisfied with what she was seeing. The growth the cadets had shown over the past few days was good. They were now a lot more alert and could work together without any problem. There also didn't seem to be any collaboration issues, with the relationship between the cadets quite good. This was different from the previous years, where groups and cliques always formed. Perhaps this was one of the reasons why this sort of graduation trial was acceptable. If the previous years had gone on, the number of casualties would be massive. Even though Delilah was present, she didn't plan on interfering with things unless a monster way beyond what they could handle appeared. Furthermore, she had a different goal by being here. Flop! A crow appeared by Delilah's shoulder. Delilah's gaze remained unmoved as the crow appeared. So, have you found anything? Quote. The crow didn't answer immediately, prompting Delilah to frown. However, after a short while, the crow retrieved a red leaf from out of thin air and presented it to Delilah. Yes, I found this. Not far from here. It appears to belong to a destroyer-ranked creature. Delilah's eyes narrowed. Destroyer rank, that would indeed be a little problematic for the cadets to handle. Perhaps it was best if she got rid of it before it got to the cadets. However, this wasn't exactly what she was looking for. I feel a familiar energy from it. Quote. Delilah's eyes jumped up the moment she heard the crow's words. Familiar energy. Her heart, which had been unmoved for so long, suddenly skipped a beat. Why do you say that? Whose energy? It's the same energy as the dragon that belonged to the human. Quote. Delilah's heart jumped out again. She tried to maintain her cold and indifferent expression, but that wasn't something she could do. Is this true? Yes, I'm sure. But it's strange. What is? Delilah's tone slowed down. I feel that there is something odd about the leaf. It's almost like it was purposely placed there. Purposely placed there? Yes. The crow's eyes narrowed as it looked at the leaf. Purposely, as if it wanted to be found out. Delilah parted her lips to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She closed her mouth, biting her lip instead. Struggling to contain the surge of emotion, she drew a quiet breath, and slowly, her expression settled back into its usual calm. I see. She was trying, really trying her best to keep herself composed. However, staring at the leaf and hearing the crow's words, she couldn't help but think. Purpose. For who? Her hands tingled, and her lip quivered, but after taking a single breath, she stopped herself from jumping to conclusions as her eyes clouded. Eventually, her figure faded. By the time she appeared again, she found herself standing in front of an empty spot where several leaves appeared. Pressing her finger against the ground and closing her eyes, she tried to feel the residual mana in the air. She stood like that for several seconds until her eyes opened. And when they did, her expression changed. A pain she thought she had forgotten resurfaced in her chest as she clenched the hand holding onto the leaf. She had merely suspected. One could even say she had deluded herself into thinking that he was still alive. But there was no denying this. He was truly alive, and the fact hurt her just as much as it relieved her. Why did you not come to me? It's my fault, isn't it? At the same time, splash, splash, the boat rocked back and forth, the waves crashing against the bow of the ship. As the boat swayed from left to right, a certain figure calmly walked towards his room as he closed the door behind him. Slowly removing his clothes and wiping his wet hair, Lazarus got a spare change of clothes. The entire time, a frown marred his features. This was something that he couldn't help. Everything had been going a little too smoothly for them. This was supposed to be a good thing, but the peacefulness made everything eerie and abnormal. It felt too unnatural, as if something was interfering with his journey. Someone powerful. Could I be overthinking things? This could very well be the truth, but Lazarus had experienced enough to know there wasn't such a thing as overthinking. If his gut feeling told him something was wrong, then there was a high chance that something was wrong. But what? What exactly could be happening? Slowly turning his body to stare at the mirror by the side of the room, Lazarus's face changed abruptly. Quote ellipsis dot dot exclamation mark quote. What sort of? He took a step back, his face changing as he blinked his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing things. Tired. He could be tired. There was no way. There was. But yet again, he saw the same thing. His lack of reflection. 653. Quote dot dot dot. What? Lazarus looked at the mirror before him, his thoughts frozen. Raising his hand, he hoped to see something, but he was shocked to see that the mirror before him remained reflectionless. What sort of? Licking his lips, Lazarus turned his attention elsewhere. He moved towards the bathroom to check the mirror there, but here too, the bathroom mirror similarly lacked a reflection. He turned on the tap water and closed the sink, hoping to see some sort of reflection in the water, but that also brought no result. His reflection, it was completely gone. How does this make any sense at all? Lazarus extended his hand, and a black cat appeared over his shoulder, staring intently at the water. Pebble, did you notice anything these past few days? Did something happen to me? Quote dot dot dot. No. Even Pebble looked confused as an owl materialized from out of thin air. Flop. I've also not noticed anything. Even you. Almighty was extremely perceptive as a mind-type monster. For even Almighty to be unable to detect a single thing. The situation might be a lot more serious than I originally anticipated. Lazarus's face grew grim as he stared at the mirror in the water. No matter how much he tried, his reflection would simply not return. It was gone. Since when? Could it be since I've returned from the strait? But I don't recall anything happening there. The most sensible option would be to ask Anaz and see if he had experienced any changes. However, just as he was about to do so, a crab appeared from behind his shoulder. It stared at the water for a few seconds before mumbling. How strange. Lazarus's eyes jumped up at the sight of the crab. He was still not used to seeing the crab. Following the incident back in the temple, and bringing the crab over to the ship, the crab, or more like coral, decided to remain with them for the time being. Something about it not being fully recovered from the incident, and being too far from its previous home. Several months had passed since then. Surely it had recovered. Not that I'm complaining since it's quite useful. More than anything, he also found its name particularly strange. Wobbles was it. He didn't really get it, but it was something that had given itself, so he could only accept it. What terrible naming sense. Did you notice anything? Lazarus asked as he stared at the crab. No, the crab shook its body. This is the first time I'm seeing such a phenomenon. However, it does appear to be something that has occurred recently. And, moving further up my shoulder, Wobbles waved its hand on the water as its reflection was similarly gone. I also seemed to be affected by it. What? It was true. The only ones that appeared in the mirror were Pebble and Almighty. Wobbles and I were both missing. But how? I believe this has something to do with what happened at the temple. I licked my lips, but I could see my reflection until lately. The same goes for me, but I didn't go with you during your recent expedition. This could more likely be an aggravation of what had previously happened to us. You're right, the crab's words had merit to them. But then, what exactly was going on? Why was he missing his own reflection, and what exactly happened in the temple? I am of the belief that the rumors from before weren't wrong. We have indeed been targeted by the great primordial one. What? It was as if the very breath had been sucked away from Lazarus's lungs. He opened his mouth to shake away the possibility, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't. His mind raced as the description of the great primordial one flashed in his mind. However, he blinked his eyes slowly. Why can't I remember? Lazarus's brows furrowed as he tried to recall the information he had read regarding the great primordial one. He could remember the most basic information. About where it resided, what it was, but at the same time, he seemed to have forgotten about several other key aspects. Wait, what? Lazarus felt. His chest tighten as a possibility occurred to him, and he tapped on his ring, retrieving a certain book. Zerul, the one who rests beneath. He remembered distinctly reading this book before, and as his fingers flipped through the pages, they eventually fell onto a certain page. Those who crossed paths with Zerul found themselves unable to recall its form, as though every trace of its appearance had been erased from their minds. It was as if they'd never encountered it at all. Only much later did the truth begin to surface. But by then, it was already too late. Ha! Lazarus's face tensed upon reading the passage. All of a sudden, everything started to make sense to him. The entire time, I had been under its influence. While he was already aware of the possibility, it never truly dawned on him. Mainly, because he had forgotten about such a key piece of information. It was as though it had been stripped from his mind. That was why the thought never crossed his mind. When it did, the notion of such a strong creature targeting him made no sense, and while things did seem a little off back then, he didn't notice too much. His memories of the incident had all been wiped out. But it became clear to him now. Something had happened during the temple, and it had most likely come as a result of Silas's actions. He must be the one behind everything. Lazarus was still unsure of the motivations that Silas had in doing all of this, but he knew that he was planning something. And it wasn't anything small. I must inform the others of the situation. Lazarus wasn't the only one who had been affected on that day. Anaz and Anne had also been affected. They were all marked. Lazarus didn't waste a single moment and immediately moved out of his cabin, rushing up towards where the dock was located. As the bright light from the white sun pierced through his eyes, and the long, gray-white sky appeared, Lazarus saw another figure rushing out. Anaz. As if sensing his gaze, Anaz turned his head, his face pale. Seeing his expression, Lazarus understood. He must have also taken notice of the situation. Anaz opened his mouth to say something, but Lazarus stopped him. Don't worry, I understand. I've also noticed the situation. Let's go talk with Anne about the situation. I'm also starting to realize why we didn't notice any of the 7 lords on our journey. It wasn't as though the bounty had never been placed. Far from it. It was mainly because those that came their way had most likely been disposed of, or never made it to them. They were Zerul's prey. Nobody but it could touch us. The thought made Lazarus's body tense as he hastily looked around before spotting Anne standing by the bow of the ship. She looked lost in thought, her hair fluttering as she looked towards the distance. Lazarus and Anaz didn't waste a second as they moved towards her. However, just as they did, Anne turned her head to face their direction. We've arrived. What? Anne stepped to the side, and it was then that the two of them noticed it. The massive shadow that loomed in the distance and stretched throughout their entire vision. We've reached the remnant south. At the same time, did any of you manage to get anything? Well, Leon scratched the back of his head with an embarrassed look. Looking at Amael, he didn't really know how to answer. I mean, we did manage to get something, but... Here, thud. Kira tossed a black piece of charcoal onto the ground, prompting Amael to stare at it speechlessly. This is whatever is left of what we managed to get. Wah! Amael glanced at Leon, who quickly turned his head away. Leon had no words, none that would make a difference, anyway. All he could do was fix his gaze on the surroundings, feigning indifference, as if distancing himself could somehow erase his presence from the moment. How many times does this make it? Amael looked at the charcoal piece before sighing. He had long given up on expecting anything from Leon's group. They always came back with pieces like this. Thankfully, the monsters his group managed to hunt were enough to feed everyone present. Amael looked towards the makeshift camp they were in. Tents were set up all over, while a large campfire stood in the middle. Overall, the situation had stabilized quite a bit since their first days in the red zone. Although it was still far from great, it was manageable. They were now able to get some proper sleep without needing to worry about getting ambushed every single second. The tensions were also a lot lower, with everyone more relaxed and adept to their surroundings. If things keep going, this might just end up being a breeze. Amael really thought things would proceed like this, but he ended up jinxing himself too early. Pack up your stuff. What? Staring at Keys, who looked at everyone without much of an expression, Amael and the others looked at him in confusion. But before anyone could voice out their concerns, Keys spoke. We can't stay in the same place for too long. It'll make us prime targets for the monsters. We need to keep moving every 2 days. But this is the most basic information that we learn in our empire. I'm sure everyone here has also learned it in the academy. Although his words were met with quite a lot of protests, in the end, he wasn't wrong. Everyone was somewhat aware of it, and all they could do was pack up their staff and leave. Where should we go? As they started to wonder about their next location, a figure appeared right above them, her hair fluttering. Huh, Chancellor, why are you? The moment Delilah appeared, everyone grew tense. Why was she here? Although they knew that she was supposed to accompany them, she wasn't supposed to appear unless a large threat appeared. Could it be? Don't worry. Delilah landed softly onto the ground while staring in a certain direction. Since you're moving, I'll decide the next location for all of you. Her hand reached towards the space in front of her. And then, re-up, under the watchful eyes of everyone present, the very fabric of space before her ripped apart as she pulled it with her bare hands. The cadets could only stare at the scene in shock as a portal appeared before them. Go. Delilah nudged them with her head. The next part of your trial is here. Chapter 654, Remnant South 2. Ook, Herk. Several gagging sounds filled the surroundings as the cadets emerged from the other side of the portal, their bodies falling to the ground while they held onto their stomachs in distress. Blearg. Some even puked. What the hell? There were some that held it better than others, but in general, almost everyone was having a hard time. This couldn't be helped. The portal was an extremely long-distance one. Even Delilah was surprised by how far it brought them. All she did was follow the direction of where she found the clues to be. It led her to this exact place. Splash, splash. Standing before a tall cliff as crimson water sprayed all over, Delilah looked towards the surroundings, her gaze falling on the crimson waters. Her deep black eyes narrowed as she looked towards the sea. Though she couldn't exactly pinpoint the location, she felt a terrifying presence hidden within the depths of the water, one that even made her tense a little. Whether she could win a fight against such a beast or not, she wasn't sure. And that was enough to tell just how powerful the creature was. The creature was also another reason why she didn't teleport any further. She was sure it would try to stop whatever she tried. Wah, look, all of a sudden, as one of the cadets recovered, they pointed towards the distance. That was when all heads turned and focused towards the distance, where they saw several structures and buildings, alongside a tall spire. The faces of many changed. Wait, is that a city? What's going on? Wait, look, there are people, holy shit. Delilah's eyes narrowed as she looked towards the distant city. She could feel a few troublesome presences in there, but not enough to make her wary. She wasn't at all surprised by the sight. The mirror dimension was vast, holding several empires and kingdoms in the past. There indeed existed cities and civilizations that still thrived in the mirror dimension. Many such places, however, were located quite far from the mirror cracks. However, most empires were aware of their existence. Looking at the city, Delilah's eyes narrowed faintly. Could he be? Her thoughts faded as she saw the cadets all turn to look at her. She merely looked back without saying anything else. This is the next part of your trial. Try to interact with the locals and figure out more about the mirror dimension. Her figure faded shortly after that. She herself needed to do some digging regarding the place. As her figure faded, the cadets collected themselves and looked around before eventually settling their gaze towards Aoife, who appeared to be in deep thought. Should we? As someone was about to suggest exploring the place, Aoife shook her head. No, that wouldn't be smart. Why, I'm sure most of the people there are somewhat aware of who comes and goes there since this is the mirror dimension. If all of a sudden a bunch of strangers show up in the city, things will look suspicious. Only a small number should go, and we should also change our clothes. Aoife's suggestion was reasonable. A lot of the cadets understood her intention and stopped speaking. Eventually settling her gaze on a certain few, Aoife's voice lowered. What do you think? The moment the massive shadow that stretched across their vision appeared, Lazarus's mind blanked. All previous thoughts faded from his mind. We're here, already. He had expected the journey to be a lot longer than this. He had been prepared to stay in the ship for a few more weeks to even month. But, they were already here. This quick. Looking at the faces you two are making, you seem surprised by how fast we've managed to reach the remnant south. That's. Lazarus looked at Anne and eventually nodded. Yes, this was a lot faster than I anticipated. I thought it was going to take a lot longer to reach the remnant south. I get it, Anne dismissed with her hand, placing it over the wooden top of the ship while looking towards the distant land. You're not wrong to think that. Under normal circumstances, it would have taken much longer. But if you haven't noticed, our journey went unusually smoothly. Nothing happened to hinder us, and we moved forward without a single delay. The fact that we've managed to arrive so quickly shouldn't really come as a surprise. Lazarus opened his mouth, but soon closed it. Indeed, she was right. Their journey had been smooth. No pirates, no monsters, no anything, but that wasn't because of their luck. Far from it. This is the first time that something like this happened and here, cutting Anne off, Lazarus tossed her a small mirror. Catching the mirror, Anne looked at Lazarus in confusion. Why did he just look at it? Though confused, Anne still followed the merchant's instructions and looked at the mirror. Her brows immediately jumped up the moment she saw nothing in it. What sort of? So the same as for you. As if finally confirming something, Lazarus nodded his head as he looked at Anaz, who was also staring at the mirror. He didn't look as shocked as Anne did. Probably because he had also noticed the same thing as him. Is this some kind of joke? Why don't I see? Because our existence is slowly being erased from this world. Quote ellipsis dot dot exclamation mark quote. Anne's expression, alongside Anaz, changed rather severely upon hearing the merchant's words. What are you talking about? What do you mean by our existence is slowly being erased from the world? You must be joking. I am unfortunately not. Lazarus shook his head, his face dead serious. Flicking his hand, a certain book appeared as he showed it to them. Their faces stiffened the moment they caught sight of the book as they both looked at him. Don't tell me. Yes, the Luminarch wasn't lying to us before. We were all targeted by the Great Primordial, and most of our memories of its abilities were erased, making us brush over what had happened before. Wait. Anaz, still in denial, hastily grabbed the book and started flipping through the pages. As he started reading, he kept mumbling things like, "This makes no sense, how come I don't remember? What is happening? Please let this be some sort of joke." But then, he reached the inevitable page, and his expression froze. He covered his mouth, his face turning completely pale. It appeared like it all finally dawned on him as Anne snatched the book from his hands and showed a similar reaction just a few moments later. Quote ellipsis dot quote. Quote ellipsis dot quote. The both fell silent as neither one made a sound. That was until Lazarus broke the silence as he took the book. Our existence is being gradually erased. It begins with our memories of the Great Primordial One fading away. That's where it truly starts. Lazarus flipped towards a certain page, reading a certain passage or extract of someone who had once encountered the Primordial One. Fragment from a torn journal, author unknown. It begins with forgetting the Primordial One first, its name, its shape, its presence, gone, as if it never was. Then, the mirror forgot about it. I stood before it, expecting to see my face stare back in weary familiarity, but there was nothing. No reflection, only an empty pane of glass. I touched it to be sure I was still there, to be sure I hadn't dreamed myself into absence. The glass was real, I was fading, next were the shadows. Mine no longer followed me. Where once my body cast long, flickering outlines in candlelight, there is now only light and floor. I walk beneath the sun as a hollow thing, and the world no longer acknowledges me. Then, when it truly begins, the forgetting, those I once called friends pass me without pause, their eyes vacant, their smiles empty. My name no longer stirs recognition. My voice, when I speak, seems to reach no ears. I am a ghost tethered by the last fraying threads of perception. I can feel it, even now. The pull, the dissolution. I am being erased, not with violence, but with indifference. A slow erasure authored by a force too ancient, too vast to be understood. A force that does not hate, for hate would require acknowledgement. No, this is worse. I am being forgotten by the very fabric of reality. Soon, I will no longer write. I will no longer speak. I will no longer be. I will drift, unseen and unheard, among the remnants of lost things. No more than a murmur in the wind, an echo like the voices that drift in the air. Pray you never remember me. For if you do, it means it has already begun for you as well. There is no escaping. It was a chilling passage that described the entire process of erasure. First, it will be the memories. Then, it will be the reflection, followed by the shadow, and soon, our recollection. The world will soon forget us, and we'll turn into nothing but the voices that whisper in the air. Lazarus's teeth slowly clenched together. They were now in the second phase. If this is true, what the hell are we supposed to do? There was clear distress in Anas's voice as he covered his mouth and took deep and heavy breaths to calm himself down. No, wait, could this be what Silas had been planning the entire time? Anas's words gathered the attention of both Lazarus and Anne as they looked at him. He continued, think about it. Silas is a hollowed, meaning that he's made up of voices, or tunes. What if Silas and the Great One are working together? What if this had been his goal the entire time, and he is just waiting for us to turn into voices before absorbing us? It all clicked in that moment. The reason for Silas's actions, the reason he could call the Primordial One, and his sudden disappearance. He had been working the entire time with the Primordial One. His goal was to absorb them. Although Lazarus didn't fully understand why they had been chosen, he knew that he must have had his own reasons. In that case, Silas might be the key to solving this situation. But that's easier said than done. Anne suddenly cut off, her voice grave. Who knows where he is right now? As far as I'm concerned, he could be all the way back in Varynthanish. By the time we find him, if he's not hiding, it'll be too late for us. So are you saying we're doomed? Anas said, his expression was tight as he looked at Anne. That's exactly what I'm saying. Anne replied, her voice cold. That's not true. Lazarus cut Anne off, his expression and voice unexpectedly calm. As he looked towards the two of them, he continued. The situation is indeed unfavorable, but I doubt Silas is far from where we are. We are his targets after all. He will eventually come for us. But, whatever the case is, we're just wasting time. Lazarus looked towards the distant land. For now, let's head to the remnant south. We might figure something out when we reach the place. Though I doubt I'm wrong. Silas, he was definitely going to come for them. Of that, he was sure. 655. Varelith. Such was the name of the nearest main city within the remnant south. Located by the shore, the city wasn't hard to spot from a distance. Mainly due to the massive spire that pierced the sky. That's the Ashen Steeple. Anne spoke the words softly, her eyes fixed on the distant structure. It's one of Varelith's most iconic landmarks, part of the Cathedral of Light. It serves as the heart of every temple and church dedicated to the Goddess of Light. Raising her head up, she focused on the top of the steeple. Some even claim the Goddess of Light dwells there. But no one truly knows. It's been a very long time since her last appearance. There are even rumors that say that she's died, but no one truly knows. Lazarus's eyes narrowed as he heard Anne's words. They were all still preoccupied with the actions of the Primordial One, but for now, their attention could only turn to the city on the horizon. Lifting his head to stare at the steeple, Lazarus's eyes flickered. So there's a chance the goddess might reside there. He pressed his lips tightly. This was an interesting piece of news. Well, they're just rumors, so don't mind them too much. The real problem is that we're within the Goddess of Light's domain, and given what we've previously done, it is best if we tread cautiously. Right. Lazarus touched his face. Did he have to change his appearance again? That was a bit. I also need to change my face since I'm quite recognizable. Thankfully, it's not like this is the first time for me. Chuckling, Anne tossed both Anas and Lazarus a ring. This is a special relic that we use in order to make people forget about our appearance after seeing it. Huh, both Lazarus and Anas looked surprised by the ring. It generally works with most people. However, if there's an exceptionally powerful mind user, they'll be able to remember our faces. That's why it's best to lay low while we're within the city. Oh, Lazarus fiddled with the ring in his hand. It was entirely black, almost matching his other ring. He suddenly thought of something. What about the eclipsed Ma? Where is that? The eclipsed Ma. Anne turned towards Lazarus before tilting her head. That's not too far from where we are, but this isn't the best time to go there. The tides are strong at the moment. I'd say that we would need to wait about 3 days before going there. 3. Yeah, going there now would be too dangerous. Lazarus fell into thought, but raising his head, he soon saw Anne's expression turn even stranger. You want to go there, don't you? Yes. Lazarus didn't deny it. This had been his goal the entire time. He needed to go there in order to collect Oricleus's eyes. The last remaining artifact before he could collect all 4 relics. You know what, I'm not even going to ask. Anne sighed before signaling her crew to stop the ship. We'll have to stop here. If we move any further, we'll risk the very real chance of getting spotted by the envoys of the church. There's currently a pretty big bounty on us, so it's best if we stay cautious. As she said that, she leaned over to the side of the ship where a smaller boat appeared. Where did that come from? The boat was about 1/5 of the size of the main boat, and it seemingly came out of nowhere as both Lazarus and Anas looked at Anne in surprise. Placing the ring on her finger, Anne just smiled. I'm not one of the 7 lords of the Crimson Sea for no reason. There are reasons as to why I'm still alive and kicking. Without waiting for the two to say anything, she kicked the ground and jumped towards the ship below. Anaz and Lazarus could only stare at each other before following along. Thud, landing on the ship, they looked around. The ship was nothing great or fancy like the previous boat. It looked like an old fishing boat, with hooks by the side and several boxes littered throughout. Are we fishers? Is that our identity? Anaz asked while looking around, his expression a little weird. Nope. Anne shook her head while moving towards a certain box and kicking it open, revealing several bones. We're bone merchants. Holy shit. Anaz's eyes widened upon seeing the numerous bones scattered on the ground. There were more than 100, and even Lazarus was surprised to see the sheer number of bones present. They're nothing great. A lot of infant-grade bones, and a few terror rank mixed in. It should be enough to fool the city guards. Been there, done. Hey, leave the bone on the floor. Don't touch it. Pausing mid-sentence, she started reprimanding Anaz as he fiddled with the bones on the ground, his eyes falling on a particular dark bone. He was practically salivating. Can I? No, you can't. What? Why? Because it's expensive, but it can help me get stronger. It's not suited for you anyway, so stop bothering me. Please, I'll slap you. Anaz could only begrudgingly drop the bone on the ground and sigh. Shouldn't expect anything less from a pirate. What was that? Nothing. Moving towards the inner part of the ship, Anne started the boat. Several runes lit up, and the boat started to move along the water, moving away from the main ship and towards the distant mass of land. As the boat started, a young girl with freckles and twintails appeared from within the ship, startling Anaz. What the fuck? He stood up while looking at the new figure. Who are you? When did you? It's me. It was only when she opened her mouth and her voice came out that Anaz realized who it was. You changed your appearance. How come? I thought that, unlike the two of you, I need to take extra precautions. I'm rather infamous in these parts. You two have a bounty, but your faces aren't that well known. Even if they do see through your disguise, it might not click with them. The same can't be said for me. She then turned her attention towards Lazarus. Since we're going to present ourselves as bone merchants, it is only right that you take over from here. Me? Lazarus looked surprised. Anne, however, nodded her head. Yes, it'll make things even less suspicious. Quote. I see. Lazarus wasn't necessarily against the idea. It was just that, he wasn't really a merchant to begin with. Well, it doesn't matter. I think I've gotten the hang of it anyway. Very well. Lazarus moved towards the bow of the ship and looked into the distance. The mass of land was drawing nearer, and as his hair fluttered, he mumbled. Looks like the Grey Chamber will be making a comeback. Oh, right. As if recalling something, Anaz spoke from behind. Lazarus slowly turned his head to look at him. I've been curious for a while. What is it? Why did you call it the Grey Chamber Merchant Group? Is there a reason for it? Yes, there is. Lazarus nodded his head seriously. Then, under the watchful eyes of both Anaz and Anne, he pointed at the sky. It's because the sky is gray. Quote. 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 By the time they arrived at the port of Varelith, an hour had passed. The sky hung low and gray, and the crimson sea was restless, slapping against the dark stone that made up the breakwater of the port. Splash, splash. Thick iron chains stretched from the docks into the water, groaning with each pull of the tide as the ship the merchant and his crew were on rocked back and forth. In the distance, dozens, if not hundreds, of ships were docked by the port, each varying in different sizes, with several tall white boats catching the most attention of all of them. Splash. As another wave crashed against the breakwater, the merchant trio finally managed to get into the port. The waters calmed down from that point as they moved past several areas and found a place to dock. It was right as they found a spot that a white boat stopped before them. Who might you be? A man clad in white appeared from the top of the boat, staring at them from above. His features were hidden by the faint white cloak draped over his body. Hello. Lazarus stepped forward, his movements a little rough. He had to change his persona a little to be more fitting with his current job. Taking a step to the side to show one of the boxes, he lightly nudged it with his foot, allowing it to fall and display the bones. I'm a bone merchant looking to find some business in Varelith. Merchant. The man garbed in white paused before jumping onto their ship, his movement light like a feather. Bending over slightly to look at the bones and analyzing them, the man in white didn't find anything suspicious. He looked towards the other crew and also didn't seem to notice anything out of order. Everything looks in check. He nodded faintly before turning around. However, right before he did that, he paused and looked back. His eyes paused on one of the bones as he picked it up. You wouldn't be so kind as to gift me one, would you? Oh, Lazarus raised his brow while looking at the bone and then the man in white. A smile soon marred his features. Oh, no. Finding the situation extremely familiar, Anah's face turned white as he looked at the man in white. He hurriedly shook his head. Don't do it. For your own sake, don't do it. But it wasn't as though the man in white could hear Anah's thoughts. Is that okay? Okay. Lazarus suddenly laughed while clapping his hands. Of course it's okay. He moved closer to the man in white while placing his hand over his shoulder. Why would I be so unkind and not gift you a bone after you've helped me? It would be extremely ungrateful of me. Cuckoo, cuckoo. Anne looked at Lazarus weirdly. He was behaving rather strangely. Yes, it would. The man in white nodded while Anah's held his head in despair. He's done for. He's just lost his freedom. Noticing Anah's strange actions, Anne frowned before moving closer to him and whispering, "What's wrong? Why are you acting like this?" Anah's bit his lips while slowly turning to look at Anne. You wouldn't understand. He eventually shook his head, his eyes looking at the envoy with pity. The pain and suffering that man will go through from this moment forward. Anah's body trembled as he started thinking about the suffering the envoy was going to go through. What the hell? Taking a step back, Anne felt chills run down her body as she looked at Anah's. Especially since he was smiling so creepily. Cuckoo. What the fuck? Chapter 656, Remnant South 4. Enjoy your stay in Varelith. Taking the bone, the man in white hopped back onto his boat and gestured with his hand to allow them through. Shortly after, the boat moved away, and the three were allowed to dock at the port. Keck. Holding back his smile, Anah's looked towards the distant white figure and shook his head. What a poor soul. He then looked towards Lazarus. So what's his job going to be? His job? Lazarus blinked his eyes, looking at Anah's in confusion. What could he be talking about? Anah's dismissively waved his hand. You think I'm a fool? Anah's chuckled inwardly. He knew the merchant well enough to know when he was going to make someone his next victim. What would you even need him to work for you for? Don't tell me that you've stalked him as well. Or is it that he might know some important information? Lazarus continued to look at Anah's in confusion. No, seriously, what in the world was he talking about? Seeing the look on the merchant's face, it was Anah's turn to look surprised. Wait, is he not going to work for us? Work for us? Why would he? Anne suddenly interjected from the side, looking even more confused than Anah's. Lazarus scratched the back of his head while looking at Anah's. Why would he work for us? Because he took money from you. Like me. Anah's felt his eyelids blink at a pace slower than usual. Something didn't feel quite right. Oh, as if suddenly understanding, Lazarus moved closer to Anah's and patted him on the shoulder. Your thinking isn't wrong. But that wasn't my bone. It belonged to Anne. Anah's eyes widened. Wait. So it doesn't really matter to me if they take it. Not really my money. Lazarus looked so proud while saying such words. Anah's, on the other hand, stood frozen, his thoughts in complete disarray. Doesn't matter to me if they take it. Not really my money. It belonged to Anne. Anah suddenly laughed, his feet staggering back as he looked at the merchant. This, motherfuck. As one of the main cities of the Remnant South, and where the main Temple of Light was located, Varelith was a large and imposing city. Finding a place to dock, the merchant and his crew got off the boat with the boxes in hand. Neither of the three attracted much attention, as there were several others who appeared to do the same. The dock was rather lively, with merchants walking all over as they settled their goods around. It's been a while since I've been here. Anne looked at the surroundings with a calm expression. She didn't look at all out of place in this weird city. Looking around, her gaze eventually fell on Lazarus. What should we do now? He was their current leader, so all decisions really fell on him. Although she was still extremely worried about the situation with the Primordial One, her mind and thoughts were completely blank on how to handle the situation. She had dealt with so many things in her life, and yet, this was the first time that she felt so helpless. In such a situation, finding someone who appeared rather calm in such a despairing situation felt reassuring. He also appeared to have some idea of their current situation. Maybe, if it was him. There are a few things that I'd like to find out. For now, I'd like to visit a certain place. Lazarus's head raised as his gaze settled over to a large steeple in the far-off distance. The cathedral. Both Anah's and Anne looked at the merchant with surprise. But then, their faces changed. That's quite reckless. There's a bounty on us at this moment. If you were to go there then, Don't worry about it. Lazarus's voice remained calm as he kept his gaze fixed on the distant steeple. I've got my own means. For now, I'd like the two of you to find some place to rent and start selling the bones. At the same time, try to find out more about the current situation within the city and any possible news related to the eclipsed Ma. Well, Anne frowned, but then shook her head. There's no need to go through such troublesome means. I know a few places where I can get the information that you need. All I really have to do is pay them. I'm going to head out there anyway, so this might just work out in all of our favor. I see. Lazarus was a little surprised to hear this, but then again, she was one of the 7 lords of the sea. She needed to be at least this bit capable in order to survive for so long. He calmly nodded his head before looking at Anne. We can meet up here in 2 hours. Is that enough? That should be plenty. She nodded back before turning to look at Anaz. What about you? Are you going to come with me, or? I'll just set up the shop myself. It's much easier that way. Pulling the box from Anne's hands, Anaz turned his attention elsewhere and got going. Anne traced his back before going in a different direction. I'll be back here in 2 hours, then. All right. Lazarus looked at the two leaving before turning his attention towards the distant church. He also started to get moving. As he moved, his eyes fell on the top of the ashen steeple. Goddess of Light, I wonder if she really is still alive. Virith Anish. Following the incident with the Luminarch and the merchant, the entire city was tense. The tensions were so high that even a random bystander felt it. The bazaar was no longer as lively as it once had been, much of it left in ruins after the clash between the Luminarch and the merchant. Temple emissaries now roamed the streets with hawk-like expressions. For the time being, the city was shrouded in a tense atmosphere. Within a certain inn, a group of 7 sat at a table. As the last member entered the inn and pulled down his hood to reveal a pair of slick gray eyes, Leon paused, glancing at the others. So, did you guys find anything out about this place? I more or less managed to find out quite a bit. Same. I think we all managed to get the same information. Right before entering the city, the 8 of them decided to split and search for information about the place. From the currency to language, and everything about the place, they planned on learning all about it before meeting up at the inn a few hours after, which was now. The currency here seems to be the solas, and everything here is quite overpriced. Aoife was the first one to speak as she tossed several coins on the table. They seem to be linked to the goddess of light, Panthea, and it appears that her influence within this region is massive. This also doesn't look to be the only city. There are several other cities under her jurisdiction, with the main one located in a place called the Remnant South. As she spoke, Aoife couldn't help but press her lips together. Despite being royalty, she found herself at a total loss regarding the situation. Be it the Academy, or the Empire, nobody had mentioned to her about certain places like this existing before. She had always thought that the mirror dimension was some lonesome place with hardly any living humans, but this had completely shattered her perception of the place. No, it makes sense when I think about it. Especially since there existed past kingdoms. But still, to suddenly find out about this place left her a little lost. It must also be quite far from the Academy crack since there's been no mention of it in any books I've read before. Lost in thought, Aoife didn't notice that Kira had taken over the discussion. I've found pretty much the same things she did. To be honest, it's kind of hard to communicate with the people here since the language is different, but thankfully, there are a few devices that can help with that. After that, I managed to find a few other things. Kira began to share her findings. Great Primordial One, 7 Lords of the Sea, Temple of the Goddess of Light, and so on. She had very detailed reports on the situation. Her reports were so detailed that it left everyone speechless. What? Seeing the looks that she was receiving, Kira tilted her head. What's wrong with all of you? Why does it look like you're constipated? I don't know about this. Aoife held onto the side of her arms. This new Kira, I am not really feeling it. In fact, I'm getting goosebumps. Holy shit. Same. Evelyn also held her arms as they looked at Kira, who frowned. You fuck. The brows of both Aoife and Evelyn shot up when they saw that Kira was about to swear. However, they quickly settled down in disappointment when Kira stopped herself and shook her head. Never mind. Tisk. We almost had her. Kira clenched her fists but maintained her poker face. Leon and the others were pretty much already used to the scene, so they didn't say much. In the end, it was Keys who started speaking. I think everyone already knows most of the stuff, but I've found something interesting while exploring the place. All attention fell towards the quiet Keys as he looked around with a deadpan expression. From time to time, he'd show some semblance of emotion, but he was usually still deadpan. Some sort of incident occurred recently. It was between one of the 7 lords mentioned by Kira, the Luminarch, and some sort of merchant. A merchant? Leon curiously blinked his eyes. This was a piece of information he hadn't heard. He had mainly focused on learning about the layout of the city and its structure. He did notice several abnormalities, but he didn't investigate deeply. Yes, a merchant, and it also looks like the merchant was able to take down the Luminarch, or at least, do something to him. Wait, isn't the Luminarch supposed to be strong? You're telling me that a merchant was able to fight against him? Agatha suddenly spoke, her hand brushing her blonde hair back. What sort of fucked up merchant does this place have? Or is it that the Luminarch was weak? No, far from it. Keys shook his head while recalling what he had heard. It's the merchant who's the strange one. He appeared out of nowhere and started trading bizarre goods, taking over most of the market within a week. There aren't many detailed descriptions of him, but from what I've heard, he's a fairly handsome middle-aged man with a calm, peaceful demeanor. Keys paused, sorting through the information in his mind. I've tried asking for the merchant's name, but it seems to be some sort of taboo around this place. It's almost as if everyone is scared of mentioning him. Especially those that managed to witness his fight with the Luminarch. That bad? Leon asked, his brow raising in surprise. That bad, Keys replied back with a nod. Leaning back, Kira just barely stopped herself from clicking her tongue. Fucking habits. Then you don't know his name? No, I still managed to figure it out. Oh, everyone looked at Keys in surprise. Then, what is it? As Aoife asked, Keys's brows furrowed tightly. In the end, he mumbled. They called him the merchant with the 1,000 voices, Lazarus. Bang! A chair fell all of a sudden as everyone turned to look at the pale-faced Leon, who stared directly at Keys. What did you say his name was? Chapter 657, Oracle I-1. What is wrong with you? Are you okay? Leon's sudden action startled everyone as they turned towards him. He wasn't usually like this. Why was he suddenly acting like this? As everyone started to question his actions, Leon's gaze remained fixed on Keys. What did you say his name was? Lazarus. Keys replied slowly, his face just as confused as the others. Neither he nor the others could understand Leon's actions. That was until Kira suddenly thought of something. Lazarus, isn't that name kind of familiar? Now that you mention it, Aoife thought for a moment before smacking her fist onto her palm. Oh, right. Isn't that the name of the guy from the Evanis family? Leon's reaction finally started to make sense. But at the same time, the others shook their head. Wait, don't tell me you actually think that it's the same one from the Evanis family, right? As Evelyn asked the question, Leon finally managed to recover himself as he looked back and placed his chair back in place. Sorry, he apologized rather quickly as he took a seat. I'm probably overthinking things. I was just startled by the name. Well, fair enough. That name's kind of unique. What are the odds we see someone else with that name? Kira laughed while leaning back. Leon looked at her and forced a smile. Yeah, indeed, what were the chances? Leon didn't want to immediately jump to conclusions, but he didn't think such coincidences existed. But why would he be here? No, it wouldn't make sense. I don't exactly know where this place is, but I'm sure it's really far. Would that guy really be able to get here? Leon's thoughts started to spiral as he thought of the Lazarus he met back in the academy. Thinking about him, Leon's mind was blank. He couldn't recall much about him, but he knew that he had accompanied him to the mirror dimension. This was at least what he had been told by the Chancellor and the guards. He had been in quite a bit of trouble back then. Although Leon's senses weren't telling him a thing, for some reason, Leon felt that the merchant Lazarus and the Evanis Lazarus were one of the same. That was why he hadn't been able to hold himself back. It's no use trying to speculate on this. I'm sure I can find more information if I investigate. From his appearance to his powers, I'm sure I'll be able to find something. Well, setting Leon's weird actions aside, shifting the conversation away, Amel looked towards the others. Did anyone else find something? Pretty much the same as the others. Yeah, the small meeting continued like that until everyone shared what they found. By the time they were done, they had a good understanding of the city and its layout. Nothing appeared strange with the place, aside from the recent incident involving the strange merchant. Something about the merchant felt extremely off, and after a while, everyone dispersed once again to investigate the matter. They felt that whatever happened had to be something big. However, the more they investigated, the more shocked they grew. A sword user, a mode of magic, summoning an army of statues from the water, casting a massive fog, an owl. The more they heard of his exploits, the more terrifying he seemed. But at the same time, this merchant, why did he seem so familiar? This is pretty impressive. Lazarus stopped in front of a huge cathedral. It stood at the center of the city, at the heart of a large and populated plaza surrounded by all sorts of Gothic-shaped buildings. Twin spires reached into the cloudy sky, their dark stone striking against the graying sky. Rows of tall, narrow windows were filled with stained glass that contrasted with the dark stone, reflecting against the white sun above. The front of the cathedral was covered in statues, saints, gargoyles, and angels, looking a little worn as they all looked towards the entrance of the large cathedral. But most striking was the large rose window looked out like a single, staring eye. Staring at the cathedral, Lazarus felt small, and looking at its entrance, he could see many people wandering inside. It looked like an extremely popular attraction. As his gaze wandered around and analyzed everything about the cathedral, he decided to head in. The moment he stepped inside, a cool breath of air slid over his skin. Light spilled from high above, catching on the polished marble beneath his boots. The floor gleamed like ice, enough for him to see his own reflection. Or at least, what should have been his reflection, he didn't have one any longer. Above him, the cathedral stretched into a vast and massive mural. At first, the murals seemed purely decorative, beautiful but meaningless, all flowing lines and simple shapes that appeared to be there to simply give life to the place. But gradually, they began to change. His gaze eventually fell towards a specific section of the murals where he saw a woman with long flowing blonde hair, standing above all else as she held onto a large specter, where he noticed a strange eye in the middle of it. Her presence appeared to radiate holiness and purity, although her face was turned away as she appeared to be facing a blurred-out figure. The figure stood opposite her, its presence looming over like some sort of monster. Lazarus's eyes narrowed at the sight, and as he turned his head, his gaze eventually fell on a certain individual, garbed in brown clothes. "Hello," Lazarus went on to greet him. Looking at him, he looked like some sort of guide. "Hello, how can I help you? Are you the guide?" "I am. Is there something that I can help you with?" "Yes." Lazarus rummaged through his pocket and took out a single coin before handing it to the guide. "I'd like some information on that mural over there." "What exactly is it?" "Ah, that mural." Taking the coin, the guide smiled before looking at the mural. "I'm sure you already have an idea, but that mural depicts our goddess Panthea in her holiest and purest of forms." A look of reverence flashed on the guide as he looked at the mural. The mural depicts the Battle of the Shattered South, one of the most infamous conflicts ever to scar the region, and the battle that granted the goddess rule over the remnant South. Lazarus listened carefully while the guide spoke. He was completely unfamiliar with this piece of history. The battle raged for months as the goddess clashed with one of the gods. To this day, no one knows for certain who her opponent was, but the rumors suggest it was Mortem. Mortem. Lazarus's brow rose, and the guard merely smiled. "It's just rumors. No one but the goddess truly knows the truth." Yet the battle was no easy one. It took everything she had to repel the other god. Though she emerged victorious, her precious scepter shattered in the struggle, and from the aftermath of that conflict arose the eclipsed Ma. Lazarus felt his breath pause at the words. "It's a rather famous location. It's not far from here, and many go there to try their luck." "Try their luck? What for?" "Well, rumors have it that the remains of the goddess scepter remain in the eclipsed Ma. The church has tried many times to search for it, but with no success. We don't believe the rumors to be true, but the goddess herself appeared to have confirmed that her scepter is indeed there." "Oh." As Lazarus's gaze settled on the scepter in the goddess's hand, more precisely, on the eye embedded within it, a flood of understanding suddenly washed over him. He finally understood why he had to go to the eclipsed Ma. "However, if even the goddess can't find it, what makes it possible for me to find it?" Noel had never been specific when telling him about the location of the eye. All he said was that he'd eventually know once he got there. Lazarus had yet to feel a single thing, but he could only accept the situation as it was. He was also curious about something. Did he really fight against the goddess? What was the reason, and is she still alive? Lazarus thought of the steeple he saw from a distance, and his face twitched slightly. Things would become rather complicated if she were still alive. Unable to hold his curiosity, Lazarus turned towards the guide. If the goddess herself says the scepter is inside the Ma, that means she's still alive. So why hasn't she gone to retrieve it herself? Of course she's alive. The guide laughed. It's just that the scepter is broken. She no longer has a need for it, and... The guide's brow furrowed, but only for a brief moment, as he then shook his head. Well, let's leave it at that. It mainly comes down to the fact that she has no need for it anymore. Although we did try to send a couple of expeditions looking for it, with no success. Some say it broke to the point of leaving nothing behind. I see. Lazarus didn't believe the words for one moment. If his guess was right and the eye truly was the relic he sought, he doubted the goddess was indifferent to it. There had to be more to it than what she let on. Is there anything else that I can help you with? Looking at the guide, Lazarus shook his head and smiled. No, this is good enough for me. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure working with you. I hope to see you again. Yes. Brushing his hair back, Lazarus proceeded to look around the church, asking questions here and there before moving out. As he did, the scorching air of the mirror dimension hit him once more as he lowered his head. His thoughts passed the moment he did. His shadow. It was partially gone. Closing his eyes, Lazarus raised his head back up and proceeded to move forward again. It's starting. His slow and gradual erasure. Chapter 658, Oracle I2. Within the confines of a quiet office, a certain figure sat behind the desk, slowly compiling a series of papers. Aldrich looked busy at work. This was only natural considering everything that was unfolding behind the scenes of the Evanus household. If he wanted to create a power strong enough to rival that of the royal family, he had to handle a lot of things. But he wasn't far off from achieving that sort of power. Everything had been set in motion for quite some time, and everyone was completely oblivious to it. There were only a few more things for him to handle before he could blow everything up. Sir, a figure appeared next to Aldrich. Without looking, Aldrich extended his hand and received a piece of paper. He looked through it for a brief moment before frowning. That is a bit faster than I expected. The paper detailed to him the current situation within the Church of Oricleus. It wasn't good. The church was slowly starting to fall apart. So not only is the cardinal sick, but the saint appears to be losing his mind. Yes, that is correct. The figure standing next to Aldrich answered. From what we've uncovered, the saint has lost a significant amount of weight and begun abusing his power, killing multiple servants as well as other members of the church. His mental degradation is quite obvious to the people. Although the church and the Round Table have tried to cover it up, rumors have started to spread, sparking public outcry. Some are even calling for his replacement. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. The situation was moving at a pace that was faster than he had previously calculated. Was the rejection of the blood too much for the saint to handle? This wasn't good news. Emmett needed to be back before the saint completely absorbed all of the blood, because by the time he did, Torin would finally make his move. Torin was merely waiting for the saint to fully integrate with the blood before taking action. Aldrich had originally expected the absorption to take a few more months to a year, but at the current rate, it might take less. This is not ideal. Aldrich pursed his lips as he raised his head to look at the ceiling. Closing his eyes, he leaned back against the chair. At least, I hope he managed to get to the remnant south. If he did, he wouldn't need to worry too much. That was because Aldrich knew he was going to meet her. So long as he met her, then everything would flow more smoothly. He just hoped that everything flowed smoothly. It was a race against time. Lazarus stared at his shadow. It was dimmer than usual, its color fading a little more with every passing second he stared at it. He understood that he didn't have much time. However, he still remained calm. There was no use in panicking. He understood that he'd soon receive a breakthrough in the situation. Silas was probably going to make a move, and he was going to wait for that moment. Until then, I'll focus on trying to get the eye. The eye was the key to everything. So long as he managed to get it, he'd be able to return to the world outside the mirror. This place, it felt suffocating. It held a beauty of its own. The architecture and various areas were striking, but beneath that charm lay something poisonous. Everything within this place was dangerous, and the dry air that filtered through the surroundings made it hard to admire anything. Lazarus was slowly starting to understand why the gods had turned mad. Not only were they slowly being consumed by the power of the source, but they were also stuck in such a harrowing and suffocating place. Anyone would go mad when being stuck here for so long. But that was of no concern to him. He wasn't like them. He could go out anytime and now held the key to tapping into the source without going mad. The key to it all was emotive magic. Level 5. He was almost there. It was right as Lazarus was about to move when he felt the presence of a figure standing next to him. When did he? What do you think of the cathedral? It looks nice, doesn't it? His voice was warm, and standing beside him felt almost like standing next to the sun. His long blonde hair swayed gently, and his eyes, matching his own hair in color, stood out brilliantly against the white garbs he wore. He looked like the embodiment of the sun itself as he slowly turned his head to look at him. It cost us quite a bit to build, but it was worth it. It gave us a vantage point to observe the surroundings. That way, if something does happen, we'll see it coming. From the way he was speaking, it was almost as though he was speaking to a longtime friend. Lazarus tried to maintain indifference as he listened to the man's words. He was also quite surprised to see that no one was particularly looking in their direction. It was almost as if their presence had been completely erased from the world. Judging from your face, you must be wondering about my identity. Why did a random man I know nothing about suddenly show up out of nowhere? Quote. More or less. Ha ha ha. The man laughed at Lazarus's bluntness, seemingly finding the situation amusing. He was just about to speak when Lazarus spoke. My guess is you're with the church. Your strength isn't exactly ordinary, and since you're not wearing the standard white robes like the other luminarchs, I'd say you hold a higher rank. Lazarus felt his body tense as he spoke. He could feel it with every part of his body that the man before him was incredibly strong. However, since he had already been found by him, Lazarus also knew that running away was impossible. Since you came to find me directly, you're obviously here for me. Is it about what happened in Virith-Anish? Virith-Anish. Lazarus raised his brow when he saw the man raise his brow in confusion. He isn't aware. I did hear about something happening there. That was you. Quote. Lazarus didn't reply. Was his original guess wrong? He had originally expected the man to approach him because of what had happened there, and that his disguise had been seen through, but that wasn't the case at all. Then, wow, the way the man looked at Lazarus changed. He looked almost impressed. Taking a look at you, I thought you were rather weak. I didn't expect you to be some sort of secret powerhouse. I guess the goddess did have a reason for calling for you. The goddess. Lazarus's facade almost broke upon hearing the man's words. He didn't hear wrong, right? The goddess. She was the one who sent the man to him. Then, looks like you have a vague idea about my identity. With a smile, the man stepped back and lowered his head slightly. Allow me to formally introduce myself. I am the voice of the goddess Pathia, the ruler of light, her chosen speaker. I am the current living saint. Extending his hand towards me, he continued. I am officially here on her behalf to invite you to the Ashen Steeple. The goddess would like to have a meeting with you. She has been expecting you. Swoosh, swoosh. In that moment, as though the veil that was shrouding their presence dropped, all heads turned in their direction. Ah, isn't that the saint? Seeing the commotion around him, Lazarus closed his eyes and tried his best not to smile. He had really put him in a tough situation. Please be careful with the box. There's a lot of important stuff inside. Anas sighed while looking at the people he had hired moving the boxes towards a small storage unit. While their original intention was to open up a merchant store, the process was complicated. A lot of paperwork needed to be filled out, and the number of solas needed in order to make everything work out was astronomical. It wasn't worth the cost. Especially since they weren't planning on staying for long. Oh, you're here. Just as he managed to sort everything within the storage unit, Anne appeared from a distance. It took a moment for Anas to recognize her as she wore a disguise. Did you find anything? Yes. Anne looked around. Is the merchant not around? Not yet. He seems to have gone towards the city center. The center? Anne thought for a moment before mumbling, could he have gone to the church? That's the only thing I'd say is worth visiting. Probably. Anas turned towards the distant cathedral. He stared at it and felt almost nothing. There was a time when he had dreamed of entering that church, of becoming a luminarch and earning a seat at the table. But now, looking at it, the feeling was gone. Why was that? What had changed? Anas was left at a loss. He felt that his obsession with the goddess had somewhat diminished ever since his journey from Virith-Anish. His thoughts turned a little complicated when thinking about it. Was this a good or a bad thing? Could this be due to the primordial one? Anas didn't know, but he decided to discard such thoughts for now as he got Anne to help him sort out the situation. That merchant said to meet here at about this time. Let's wait for him for a bit and see if he shows up. And what if he doesn't show up? I don't know. Anas licked his lips. He just hoped that no incident would occur from this moment forward. But how could his wishes ever occur? A sudden commotion rippled through the area as Inaz and Anne exchanged a glance. Turning toward the source of the noise, they saw a crowd of people rushing toward the city center. Quick, Hiyori, we might miss it. What's going on? Why are they all rushing there? Both of them suddenly started to have a bad feeling all of a sudden. And then, just as they began to move to understand what was happening, they heard someone scream, "The living saint! The living saint has left the church. He's inviting someone to the church. Hurry!" What? The eyes of the two widened as they looked at each other. Then, they both rushed into the crowd. Chapter 659, Panthea 1. The commotion caused by the living saint was large. Almost everyone within the plaza turned their attention towards them. It's the saint. Swoosh, swoosh. Everyone knelt on the ground, holding onto their hands while silently praying towards the figure standing next to Lazarus, who took all of this in with a smile. He looked used to this type of scene. Feeling the numerous gazes of the people around, Lazarus remained indifferent as he looked towards the living saint. Though he didn't speak, his meaning was clear. Yes, I do believe we should go. Smiling again, the living saint stepped forward and moved towards the distant cathedral. Lazarus followed from behind as the crowd parted. Thankfully, none of them dared to cause any trouble. As Lazarus looked around, he could see the amount of reverence the people had for the living saint. His face showed no signs of change as he walked back into the cathedral. At the same time, his mind churned with all sorts of thoughts. So the goddess is indeed alive, and she expects me. Why is that? Could it be that she detected something from me, or is there more that meets the eye? Lazarus's feelings were a little mixed. From everything he had heard, this goddess, she didn't seem like a person worth trusting. Especially since, he had once tried killing her. Or at least, sworn to. We're almost here. Stopping before a certain door, the living saint turned towards Lazarus as he reached for the door. I'll be stopping here. The goddess will be waiting for you at the top of the stairs. I hope you have a productive conversation with her. With that, he turned to the door and opened it, revealing a long flight of stairs spiraling upward. Lazarus stared at them in silence for a moment, then gave a small nod and stepped forward, beginning the slow ascent. Shortly after he moved up, the door closed behind him, and the world around him grew silent. The only thing he could hear was the slow and rhythmic sound of his own steps. They echoed loudly within his mind as he slowly and gradually made his way up. Until he finally reached the top, where the space opened up into a large, flat room. The room barely had any decoration. It was a simple hexagonal space that offered an unobstructed view of the entire city from all sides. At its center sat a woman with long, flowing blonde hair, her back turned toward him. She wore a white dress, and her entire presence appeared to radiate an indescribable purity that made one want to worship. For a moment, Lazarus's gaze got lost in her back. He felt like bending over and worshipping her. You came. This sense of worship only heightened the moment she spoke, her soft and melodious voice sounding like that of an angel. Lazarus had to take a deep breath in order to calm himself down. What other option did I have? You called for me. That is true. Though he couldn't see her, it almost felt as though she was smiling. I wasn't sure at first, but now that I see you, I can tell that you must be the one that Noel sent. The one that Noel sent? Lazarus paused for a moment before coming to an understanding. So this was the case. You must be here for the eye, correct? Correct. Given the way she was speaking, it became clear that she was aware of why he was here and that Noel had made some sort of agreement with her. You must also be aware that the eye is in the eclipsed Ma, correct? Lazarus didn't answer. He thought that at first, but now, he wasn't so sure anymore. The goddess was alive, and just standing before her felt extremely pressuring. Surely she might have it. You don't seem to be convinced that it is. I heard that you lost it during a big fight. That is what the rumors suggest. If those weren't rumors, the goddess gently spoke over Lazarus. I indeed fought a long battle, and ended up losing my scepter in the process. The eye was embedded deep into the scepter. If you wish to collect the eye, you must go directly into the eclipsed Ma. Lazarus frowned. Why didn't you try to collect it? If the scepter contained the eye. Then, because I can't. The goddess answered calmly. The battle was one where I barely came out on top. It took everything from me, and even now, I am still suffering the consequences of the battle. The goddess paused there, but from her subtly shifting tone, Lazarus could tell that those weren't memories she wanted to recall. So, Noel is that strong? Lazarus did recall hearing that the one she fought was Mortem. In that case, for him to make such a strong figure suffer like this. He was certainly extremely strong. But still, something still made no sense to him. Why did you fight him in the first place? If she fought him and suffered such injury, why was she willing to help someone he had sent? Did they make some sort of agreement during the fight? That could be the case. At least, that was what Lazarus believed at first. His mind blanked the moment he heard her next words. Why did I fight? That's obviously because I wouldn't have survived otherwise. Noelle was trying to kill her. Well, taking into consideration everything he knew about the past, it made sense. Had he been in Noelle's position, he would have done the same. Perhaps he fought because he had to. For his freedom. The only reason I survived was because of Noelle. He's the one who saved me, hence why I'm doing him this favor. I wouldn't have done so if it weren't for him. Question mark quote. Lazarus's mind paused for a moment. Noelle saved her. Then, it wasn't him that she was fighting. Haha, based on your reaction, it doesn't seem like Noelle told you anything. Her back was turned, yet she seemed to sense every one of his reactions as if watching him through some invisible mirror. The stories beneath are mere lies and speculations. Noelle and I were never fighting. If anything, he was helping me. Her voice grew a little dim from that moment. Even though he didn't have to, after all the things that we had done to him, he still decided to help me. I was blinded, truly blinded. Her body stirred slightly, emotions started to well up deep within her body as for the first time, she turned her head. Lazarus stood still, feeling a certain pressure coming from her as she slowly turned her head. And then, their eyes met, or more like, his eyes met her face. She didn't have any eyes. In their place burned two steady, unblinking flames. But beneath those flames, Lazarus could see a certain emptiness. He knew then that they were merely placeholders for what wasn't there anymore. I paid a heavy price in the battle. I lost my eyes, and with them, my connection to the source. But in that darkness, my mind became clear. I finally saw the truth of what I'd done. She gave a faint, sorrowful smile as she brought her hand to her face. The flames in her eyes flickered. Maybe this was the price I had to pay, to atone. A way to show how blind I once was. Lazarus stared at her eyes without making a face. It wasn't because he didn't want to, but because his entire body was frozen in place, unable to move at all. Just staring into her eyes made him feel completely and utterly helpless. If this was how strong a crippled god was, just how powerful was a full god. Eventually, she closed her eyes, and the pressure alleviated. When Lazarus came to, the goddess had already turned her head away. How much do you know about what happened to us? About the past? Lazarus opened his mouth, but soon closed it. He didn't really know much. Just, a meteorite fell, and people gained powers. Then the world started to crack and the mirror dimension formed. PFTT. A small laugh escaped the goddess's lips. This prompted Lazarus to frown. Was he wrong? But, how could that be? He had seen the recollection of what had happened back in the time he had been at the Kasha. Could it be that it was a lie? Don't get me wrong. You're not necessarily wrong with what you've said, but you're also not quite correct. It really does seem like Noelle hasn't told you anything. We weren't exactly in the best position to speak. I can see that, the goddess replied, her tone growing a little somber. While what you said is mostly correct, there are a few things that you are missing out on. No, it's more like you're missing out on the most important aspect of the entire ordeal. Which is, powers weren't the only things that came with the meteorite. What? Lazarus's expression changed upon hearing her words. His chest suddenly felt heavier, and some of the things that didn't quite make sense before started to make sense. But at the same time, he was suddenly overcome with a certain sense of dread. It was right all along. But we were too blinded by our lust for power, too consumed by the promise of immortality to see it. Quote. And when we finally did, it was already too late. He was gone, and we were. She stopped, just for a moment. It was that short and brief pause that created a subtle, yet visible tension that made Lazarus unable to breathe. The mirror dimension didn't form because of the meteorite. Her voice softly drifted throughout the room. Quiet, and almost in a whisper. The mirror dimension was never supposed to be a thing to begin with. The only reason why it is even here is because we grew too strong. The mirror dimension was formed to trap us. To seal all of us. The goddess paused again, her voice straining. The mirror dimension is our prison. A construct forged by the outer beings to seal us in, and never let us out. Chapter 660, Panthea 2. Listening to the goddess's words, Lazarus's mind went completely blank. It wasn't that he had a hard time processing her words, but it was more like he had a hard time accepting them. Theirs being strong enough to create a separate dimension and seal every single human in it. For them to be so capable. Just how strong were they? He managed to gain his answer a few moments later. Their strength is nothing to scoff at. It took the combined effort of Noel and me to beat one of the outer beings. We don't know just how many of them there are, but they are all incredibly powerful and mysterious. The goddess's voice was smooth as she spoke, narrating everything that she knew about the outer beings. It wasn't so much that they were much stronger than us, but it was more like their connection to the source. It was much deeper and profound than our own. It is by a miracle that we were able to win. Lazarus listened quietly, trying his best to keep up. However, the more he heard, the more shocked he was. Their connection was more profound. He had seen firsthand how powerful the source was. For their connection to be so deep. Just how strong were they? Not only that, he started to understand something else, too. Was the reason you were sealed because of your connection with the source? Yes, it was. They deemed us to be too dangerous an existence. The goddess's voice grew lighter. Almost in a self-deprecating way. No, it was more like they deemed the seven of us far too dangerous an existence. They created this entire dimension to keep us in check. Then what about the world outside? There are humans too. Was it not some sort of alternate planet? If so, that is also Earth. The goddess replied in a low tone. The world outside is merely the Earth after our imprisonment. If not for Torin finding a breakthrough and managing to shatter the dimension, the two worlds would have never come in contact with one another. But in the end, even when he managed to shatter the dimension, we were still unable to leave. The goddess slowly lowered her head to stare at her hands. The world outside has become a kind of poison to us. We can still go there in artificial bodies, but it's not the same. The sense of freedom, the open blue sky, the warmth of the sun, the freshness of the air, we can barely feel any of it through our clones. With a subtle trembling of her hand, the goddess clenched it into a fist. That is why Torin is so desperate. He wants to be free from this prison. This is why he's trying to control the outer world. What do you mean by that? Lazarus narrowed his eyes. He was aware of the fact that Torin and Sithras were one of the same. However, the one thing he had never understood was the motivations behind Sithras's actions. For a being so strong, why did he never forcefully control the outer world? Why did he try to control it secretly? It made no sense. Do you know how we deepen our connection with the source? The goddess asked, her question catching Lazarus off guard. You can deepen your connection. No, thinking about it, he certainly felt like he could deepen his connection with the source. He just had to enter the same state as he did in the past. If he could then, faith, the goddess replied, her tone even. That is how we deepen our connection with the source. Faith, quote. Lazarus opened his mouth, but the words he was about to say never left his mouth. All of a sudden, a lot of things started to make sense in his mind. The reason why there were so many churches. The reasons why these so-called, regular people, decided to call themselves gods. This was all, to raise their faith. The more we are worshipped, the deeper our connection with the source becomes. It is by such means that we were able to put up a fight against the outer beings. It is also the reason why Torin never forcefully took the outer world by force. One cannot artificially create faith by force. It must come naturally. Taking in the words, Lazarus took a deep breath. Yet again, one of the answers to his questions had been answered. It all suddenly started to make sense. The reason he had been able to feel the source in the past. It was all because of the faith he had managed to acquire as Oracleus. But even faith has its limits. The goddess shook her head, her closed fist slowly relaxing and opening up again. Faith may draw us closer to the source, but it won't change the most important fact. The source does not accept us. It rejects us. The more powerful we became, the more insane we become. In some way, losing connection with the source has allowed me to see things clearly once more. Lowering her head, the goddess's voice similarly lowered. Quote. It is also the clarity that made me realize how wrong we were, and how right he was. We should have listened, but we were all too blinded back then. Lazarus didn't need to ask to know whom she was referring to. It was Oracleus, or to be more precise, Emmet. He was the only one that could see through the madness, but at the same time, he was also the first one to crumble under the madness. Though he could see through it, he wasn't immune to it. In fact, he had it the worst. Lazarus closed his eyes. Indeed, based on the memories he had seen and the conversation he had with the mirror, this was indeed the case. His death was most likely the turning point of everything. His death and actions were what drove Torin to the point of utter madness, resulting in the current version of him. A man, blinded by both power and madness. Taking a deep breath, the goddess looked towards the city beneath. But even in his madness, he never lost sight of his goal. Of all of us left, he's the only one who hasn't given up. He's also the only one that is capable enough to contend with the outer beings. You can even say that the reason we still exist is because of him. There were hints of emotions in her voice as she spoke. Mostly, her emotions seemed complex. On one hand, she didn't appear to approve of what Torin was doing, but at the same time, Lazarus could almost pick up hints of sadness in her voice. In his own twisted way, he's the only one who is trying to save what remains of this world. He's also the only one capable of doing so. He's the only one capable of doing so. Indeed, the goddess nodded. He's found a way to connect directly with the source without any sense of disconnect and rejection. He's also not far from reaching the goal. So long as he manages to master the power and become the 8th god, then we might just be able to be freed from this prison. Hearing the goddess's words, Lazarus took a deep breath. These were the same exact words he had heard from Noelle. Just like he said, the key to it all was emotive magic. But there was only one thing that she got wrong. Torin, or Sithris, he wasn't the only one with the power to become the 8th god. He could do so as well. Lazarus believed that he could achieve the same thing. He just needed time. So long as he had more time, he felt that it was possible. Still, Lazarus set all those thoughts aside and focused his attention on something else. He wanted to know more about the outer beings. If Torin were to become the 8th god, would he be able to beat these outer beings? I wonder. The goddess blankly stared towards the city beneath. I'd like to believe it's possible. Noelle and I proved that it is possible to beat the outer beings. It's possible, but the price we needed to pay was far too high. However, if someone were to fully tap into the source, then... The goddess didn't finish her words, but the meaning behind them was clear. Lazarus could only quietly purse his lips while musing over the situation. So, not even they know much about these outer beings. However, for them to be able to seal them, it should be enough proof of their strength. They can currently put up a fight against them, but they can hardly win. In that sense, the key to it all was the source. So long as they could tap into the source, they felt confident in fighting against them. There was also another thought that occurred to Lazarus. You said that you managed to defeat one of the outer beings. Where is their body? Their body. The goddess paused for a moment before lowering her head. Torin took the body. Torin, why did he? He said that he wanted to experiment with it. He wanted to see if he could tap into their powers. He did. And, Lazarus licked his lips, feeling a certain weight forming in his chest. What were the results of his experiment? A failure. The goddess replied. He's tried everything, from implanting organs into other people's bodies, to trying to replace their blood with that of an outer being. In the end, most of them died without being able to tell the next day. The power isn't something most can wield. It's a power that seems to come straight from the abyss itself. A darkness that can't be tamed. But, pausing, the goddess grew hesitant. This aroused Lazarus's curiosity. But, I did hear about one of the experiments working somewhat. Although only somewhat. What? Lazarus paused. It had actually worked. Even partial. The fact that he somehow managed to make it work left Lazarus at a loss for words. How did he manage to do it? And who? But like I said, it only partially worked. Last I heard, the experiment was somewhat of a failure. Then again, the subject did end up becoming extremely strong at a young age. It's just that they don't seem to have any affinity with the source. The goddess shook her head. In the end, Sithris left his puppet Dawn to keep an eye on the subject. He's long given up on her. Lazarus's entire body froze in that moment. Thinking about the goddess's words and connecting all the bits and pieces together, a thought occurred to him, and his usually calm expression started to falter. Given up on her. Dawn to keep an eye on the subject. A darkness that can't be tamed. Becoming extremely strong at a young age. Lazarus felt the very air get stripped out of his lungs as a certain image appeared in his mind. It couldn't be her, right?